International Students Interest Group. Oh yes, thank you so much for starting the recording. My name is Katie Odner, and I am the convener for the 2022-2023 year. And today we have three wonderful speakers from around the US and the world who are going to talk about international students and libraries, and we'll also be introducing next year's incoming convener, Paula Johnson, in a moment. Just checking the chat here. Oh, thank you, Aaliyah. So before we begin our program, I just wanted to reflect on some enrollment statistics for international students in the US. So this year, we're sort of emerging from the pandemic into a new normal, and the population we serve has been shifting. According to the Open Doors report, the number of international students studying in the US reached an all-time high in 2018 and was also similarly high in 2019 with around 1 million students. And that number dropped by a significant 15% during the pandemic. Then this year, we're seeing slight increases again of about 3%. So we're still below the level of students from before the pandemic, and it's not clear if we'll regain all of those students in the near future, particularly with some countries like China and Saudi Arabia beginning to send fewer students to the US. But I found at my campus, at least, this has led to sort of some positive and thoughtful conversations around international students that are focusing less on quantity and more on quality. Those 2 years when we had fewer international students, people were beginning to talk about or continuing a conversation about the valuable perspectives and experiences that international students bring to our campuses and our libraries. And today we're going to really capitalize on that by having speakers who focus their presentations around asset-based thinking. So in other words, emphasizing what international students bring rather than what they may lack. As you'll hear also from our first speaker, this is a conversation that has been going on for a long time. So we're excited to keep it at the forefront and also see how that shows up, that asset-based thinking shows up in different aspects of our work in libraries. So now I want to turn it over just quickly to Peggy and Mihoko, our incoming convener and past convener, to introduce themselves. So Mihoko, would you like to start?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Mihoko Hosoi. I'm the Associate Dean for Collections, Research, and Scholarly Communications at Penn State, and I'm the past convener of this group. Nice meeting you all. Peggy?
And hi, everyone. I'm Peggy Nzomo. I am the incoming convener or current convener, because we're going to have an incoming convener shortly. I work at the University of Illinois at the Mortenson Center for International Library Programs.
So thank you. And that leads us straight into introducing Paula Johnson, who will be our incoming convener for this coming year. Paula is a librarian at the University of Arizona Libraries, where she's a liaison librarian to the College of Engineering and also serves as the liaison to the College of Architecture, Planning, and Landscape Architecture. You may recall that Paula presented at our last annual meeting on creating international student-focused events via cross-campus collaboration. So we're really excited to have her join us. Welcome, Paula. Do you want to say a few words?
Just that I'm really excited to be part of this group and looking forward to the year ahead. I think we're going to have a great year. And like you say, international students have been a big part of any university population. And I think the pandemic has given us a chance to kind of rethink, just how important this population is.
Thank you, Paula. So now I'll turn it over to Peggy to introduce our speakers, our first speaker.
All right, so I'm going to introduce Miriam Conter-Morgan, who is our first speaker. Miriam Conter-Morgan is an associate professor and deputy vice chancellor at the University of Sierra Leone, and she had previously served as a university librarian. She was a faculty librarian at The Ohio State University, an ESL instructor at various institutions, including Harvard University Summer School, and lecturer in linguistics at the University of Sierra Leone. I have known about Miriam's work for a while, at least when I worked as Global Education Librarian at Kent State University. She informed my research and she informed a lot of the work that I did. She has written a lot on using ESL strategies in teaching information literacy to limited English language proficient users. And so I know that she speaks from her heart about this topic. She has written a lot about just the asset-based aspect of international students. And as librarians, being able to change our minds from this deficit-oriented thinking. And so it is my pleasure to welcome her and let her take it away from here. Welcome, Miriam.
Oh, Miriam, you're muted.
Sorry.
There you go.
Yeah, good evening from my part of the world. It's 6:12 p.m. and it's a pleasure to be a part of this panel. And like Peggy has just introduced, I came into librarianship from a background in linguistics and ESL teaching. And as a faculty librarian on tenure track, I needed to find a topic quickly to launch into publications. And it seemed like this was the best way I could get into it, looking at both, trying to merge both of my my backgrounds. So I started on this route, and so reading around the topic, and found that a lot of what I was seeing was, you know, the whole deficit thing. So what I'm going to talk about is what I call an old friend remembered, which is a paper I had presented actually at an ACRL conference in, I believe, in Charlotte. And I titled it Journey with New Maps, Adjusting Mental Models and Rethinking Instruction to Language Minority Students. Again, just a little note there, if I were to write this article again, I probably would not use the term language minority, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Then I'll go on to talk about what's been happening in terms of internationalization in higher education institutions. And then try to problematize a little bit about who is an international student. And because there's been more research on international students in HEIs. And then I'll end with what I would see are new mental maps that libraries and librarians can proceed with. So, there we go. Right, so that paper, like I said, was based not so much looking at international students as a group, but looking in particular at instruction to them. And I'll just highlight, I've just highlighted, can you see my screen?
No, we're not seeing it.
Oh, okay.
I guess we need to enable. Okay, you
Sorry.
can try to share now.
Am I there now?
We're still not seeing it.
Oh.
So what do I need to do?
I also have your slides here if you'd like me to share
Okay.
from my screen.
Okay, yeah, that will work.
Just pull them up.
Yeah.
Oh.
any case, so in the interest of time, I guess I could. So in that paper, some of the things I wrote about was that it should not be assumed that all international students come with serious, if any, language deficiencies. And what I was speaking to there was the fact, well, I guess taking myself as an example, but just looking at other international students who come from countries where English is the official language and the language of instruction. And again, I was tapping into the linguistic phenomenon of world Englishes. And also, I noted that most international students have learned or used English in different settings and for various purposes before coming to the US. And again, as an ESL teacher, I had firsthand experience of that, where it was very interesting where in teaching in an ESL program, and it was thought that some students, because they were not using the American variety, so their writing was graded differently. So that was something that I had experience of. And another point noted in that article is that, I quote, "and what American instructors see as absent, filtered through their own cultural expectations, orientations, and expectations, may actually be present in forms they have not recognized." In other words, if we are looking through a cultural frame that is ours, and we kind of have a worldview that cultural frame is the one, then we fail to see other ways of thinking, other ways of seeing and doing. And another point noted in the article, in the presentation, was that the majority of studies on international studies focus on those from Asia. So in other words, there was some kind of implied homogeneity among the students. So the recommendations out of that was that librarians needed to question their mental models and the dominant ideologies about language minority students, and also move beyond what I called deterministic stance and deficit orientation. And to make classrooms more like what's known as contact zones, where social spaces where cultures meet, clash, grapple with each other, and interactions are negotiated. And that's the buzzword there, the highlight there. So let's move on to what's a phenomenon that's happening these days in the last decade or more, that's been intensified approach to internationalization in higher ed institutions. And this has been characterized by things like worldwide border crossing knowledge transfer. And by this, we're talking about all the platforms that are available through which knowledge flows, north, south, south, north, south, south, and so on. And it also is, again, an increase in the physical mobility across borders. And also institutions have been getting into more cooperative arrangements with other institutions abroad. And of course, international education is a big thing, nothing new there, but also collaborative research. So we see a lot of scholars in, say, North America collaborating more with with scholars around the world. And of course, now that rankings are included in that, the international reputation of an institution is also something that they are working on. And but there has also been a growth in the mobility of the migration of not just students, but also of scholars. And there are also partnerships that have seen kind of split site degrees. For example, somebody maybe at Ohio State and also would have a supervisor for a graduate degree, say at the university or, South Africa, for example. And we've also seen universities, institutions in the North establishing branch campuses around the world. And of course, with virtual platforms now, we have what we call virtual border crossings. And so with all of this, I want to kind of focus on physical mobility across borders. That is when students actually move across, leave their home countries for study in another country. And the literature would give you synonyms like foreign student, non-immigrant, mobile student, transnational, and so on. But I'll just focus on the USCIS definition and also the OECD that's been used in Europe. In the US, a non-immigrant student, and I'm quoting here from the website of the USCIS, a non-immigrant student is an alien who's been admitted to the United States as a full-time academic student at an accredited institution. And for Europe, OECD, and so on, would term international students as those who received their prior education in another country and are not residents of their current country of study. I found this interesting article that looked at a university in Italy, in Rome, and in their survey of the study of students there, they developed 3 categories of the term of who international students are. One category they call transnational, migrant. And these are typically working adults. They take classes at the university sporadically, but probably because they are working, they have a good proficiency in Italian, in the language, and also had in-country family networks. So that's the transnational migrant. And I'm sure we can all, in the US context, we can make comparisons there. They also have, well, what we all agree on is who the international student is, a definition, recruited through a university's call for admission. So it's purpose specific, the reason why they are in the host country. And they have in this study, they were seen to have lower language proficiency than the first category. The third one, the third category was of vulnerable or invisible students. And these are typically those who, again, some works in the literature have looked at social inclusion in the host country. So the vulnerable, invisible student is one that it was found not to be that well embedded within the host country culture and had a lower proficiency in the use of the Italian language. So I just want, by trying to look at these definitions, to problematize the whole idea of who an international student is. So in other words, we're looking at either short-term or long-term mobility. Short-term could be a semester, an academic year, and then there are those who are degree mobile, quote unquote, because they come specifically for a 4-year or 5-year, whatever the case may be, duration. So, but because statistics typically does not disaggregate these numbers, it then makes it difficult for us as librarians to be
I've lost Miriam's sound. I don't know if anyone else if she's paused for others.
I cannot hear her either.
at a branch campus.
Oh, we lost you for a little while, Miriam. I'm hearing you now. Can you hear us?
Hello.
Oh, we may have a delay. Can you hear us now, Miriam? Well, I was about to tell Miriam that we were about at time for her presentation, but we will have time for questions. So hopefully we can, once all the presenters have gone, hopefully we can get Miriam back and have some time to hear more about this and also ask some questions about how what she's spoken about can impact our work in libraries. So we'll try to get her back, but in the meantime, I'll have Peggy introduce our next speaker.
All right, I think we'll move on to the next speaker, and then hopefully we'll get Miriam back shortly. Our next speaker is Emily Reed. Emily Reed is Reference and Instructional Librarian and International Student Support Services Liaison at Penn State University Libraries in Harrisburg campus. And her title of presentation is Instructional Practices for Engaging the Unengageable Population. So welcome, Emily, take it away.
Thank you so much. Let me go ahead and open my presentation here. All right, are we seeing my slides here? Great, okay. All right, so I wanted to frame this conversation about focusing on library instruction with the most common deficit-based comment that I hear, which is that it's so hard to engage with international students because they don't participate. I've heard that quite frequently, so I thought that's how I would frame my presentation today. So I wanted to begin with the framework that I'm operating on for deficit thinking so that we can then move forward to dismantle it. So the definition that I'm using is that deficit thinking holds students from historically oppressed populations responsible for the challenges and inequalities that they face. And that can lead to victim blaming or focusing on deficiencies. And it also ignores systemic influences that enable educational disparities. So I have some examples that might sound familiar. You might have heard these before in the library instruction classroom or from teaching faculty that you work with. So one is they can't possibly succeed since they never volunteer to participate in class. They don't understand this scientific article because their English skills aren't good enough. And this student just plagiarized because he was too lazy to cite his sources. And we're going to circle back around to these later in the presentation. So what is actually going on? I wanted to bring up some variables that international students and frankly, lots of college students deal with. The first is academic culture shock. Depending where the international student comes from, they might be used to very different pedagogies and instructional techniques. So they might, not be used to a teacher saying, it's okay to question me, it's okay to question the course material. That might be a totally new approach to them. They're also learning new communication methods. Their computer keyboards could be potentially very different. I've seen some laptops that come from China. They look pretty different from the computers that we have on campus. And learning to navigate the course management system. Not new just to international students, but potentially new to all college students as well. And then also just adjusting to a new life. These are new college students oftentimes. They're learning how to be a college student, how to navigate a new region with new traffic laws, learning the new culture, and just meeting new people. So let's talk about some starting points. And this first one really lays the foundation to be able to be successful with all the others, which is to know yourself. You need to be able to know who you are and your background and reflect on how the experiences that you have impact your teaching identity. You also want to identify and interrogate your biases. There are some really good bias checker tools out there. Project Implicit from Harvard is a really good one. So if you're thinking, you know, I'm probably biased because I'm human, but I'm not sure how, there are tests that can help with that. The next one is know your audience. So figure out who are your international students, what countries do they come from. If you have an international student office, you can get data from them or student services. And then also learn about their educational systems from different countries. When I started in my position in 2019, I looked for videos both on YouTube and then also in our video databases that just captured what happens in the classroom in 10th grade in different countries that I know the students on my campus come from. And that was really able to inform me on these different educational backgrounds and different educational experiences that international students bring to our campus. Study what information literacy means beyond ACRL's IL framework. The IL framework, it greatly values Western systems of knowledge production and doesn't value other ways of knowing, if you've heard that phrase before, ways of knowing, in other cultures. It doesn't value oral histories as a means of knowledge production to the extent that another culture might value that. So information literacy, when we talk about it in the United States, is going to be very different from information literacy in another country with how information is disseminated and created. I do have some pedagogies and theories as well that I think help. So I want to talk about these a little bit as well. The first one is culturally responsive teaching. You might have heard that before. Geneva Gay has 5 essential components of culturally responsive teaching, and those are: build a strong knowledge base about cultural diversity, design culturally relevant curricula, set high expectations for all students, demonstrate an appreciation for different communication styles, and intentionally include multicultural instructional examples. And then very closely related is cultural humility. Cultural humility is defined as being other-oriented, or you could think student-centered, honoring who that person is and what they bring, engaging in constant and consistent self-reflection, and expressing respect and a lack of superiority, even when cultural differences are present. And I do want to note that you may experience discomfort when teaching due to a dichotomy of conflicting priorities. A user experience viewpoint of teaching would tell you to make the classroom experience as comfortable as possible for the students in the classroom. And if you take that viewpoint of making things comfortable, you might think that that means stand at the podium, lecture, do demonstrations, and students will be comfortable. However, while students might appear to be comfortable with that, that doesn't ultimately help them when their other course instructors at the university are using active learning techniques and using discussion and other participation methods. So it is okay to have these active learning strategies in the classroom, even if students feel uncomfortable with it. They will get more comfortable with it with repetition and practice. So I do have some practical strategies to share as well. First is tell students who you are and what your credentials are and what it means to be a librarian. In some other countries, the word librarian does not mean that the person has a master's degree. It might be someone with a high school degree. So if you want to promote that feeling of authority that students should take you seriously as an educator, then let them know that you have a master's degree in library science, that this is a professional position and what you do. Respect student privacy and safety. So going back to the discussion about comfort, it doesn't mean that just make students uncomfortable and be okay with that. There are ways where you can meet in the happy middle. For example, I use active learning strategies when I teach international students, and I use anonymous polling. So students can still participate, their voices are still heard, They can ask questions anonymously without having to identify themselves as the person who's asking or showing that they're confused. And that can really help. Utilize universal design for learning principles, which is not just good for international students, but for all classrooms. But provide your instruction in a variety of methods. So if you're doing a lot of verbal teaching, perhaps provide a handout as well that students can take with them, and they can be looking at what you're saying as well at the major points that you're making. Reduce cognitive load, which is another theory I didn't mention earlier, but you want to make sure that you're able to remove as much noise so that the students can really focus on learning the content that you're trying to share with them. So for example, and this is not an advertisement, but I use a tool in the classroom called Nearpod, which casts what I am displaying on my computer to their devices. So they can be on a library computer or their own laptop, or they could be on a tablet, though that's not as ideal. But what it does is when I'm showing the library website, go click here, go click here, go click here, instead of them having to follow along and figure out where on the page am I going, their browser might be in a different language and mine might be in English. Instead of having to go through all of that, my web page opens on their computer and they don't have to worry about, oh my goodness, I can't figure out, I think I lost her a couple of pages ago. That kind of thing reduces the cognitive load so that they can really focus on the content that I'm trying to share with them. Build in extra time, especially when dealing with technology. When I help international students get on our library computers, they don't always know where Control-Alt-Delete is. So I have to go around and show them Control-Alt-Delete is here, and then the computer is unlocked. So just build in the extra time, because the way we unlock our computers is different. And then finally, talk to the course instructor and see if they have any non-academic goals for their students. For example, they might have a goal of, I want them to get more comfortable with English speaking. So if you know that's a goal that the course instructor has, then you can design your lesson to incorporate discussion, group discussion, or whole class discussion. So let's revisit those deficit thinking examples I opened with and reframe them to be a little more asset-based and inclusive. So here was the first one: they can't possibly succeed since they never volunteered to participate in class. Well, let's think about what is the goal of class participation and how else can I achieve that? For me, when I'm doing a one-shot, my goal of class participation is a very quick formative assessment. Are you with me? Do I need to go back? And if students seem uncomfortable raising their hand, how else can you get that goal of formative assessment, checking that they're still with you? They don't understand the scientific article because their English skills aren't good enough. Is English communication the actual issue? It's possible it is. At most universities, students have to pass a TESOL test. There might be some additional language requirements, but just because they've passed those requirements doesn't necessarily mean that they're used to academic language. But if the issue is English, how can I reduce the cognitive load? And if it's not, how can I better scaffold the activity? I work with a lot of first-year students and a lot of 18-year-olds who English is their primary language, don't know how to read a scientific article. So you might want to consider breaking it up into sections. And then finally, the student just plagiarized because he was lazy. And I'm sorry, my Zoom controls are blocking a little bit of that one. But am I operating on a bias? And whenever you assume that someone is being lazy, there's probably an inherent bias there to examine, right? But then also, how can I better support and scaffold citation skills? Citation works differently in other countries. The practices are different. What meets the threshold of requiring a citation is different. So don't assume that it comes out of laziness, but consider, do I need to do the education about why we cite a little bit differently? All right, so thank you so much. I will put my email in the chat there, and then I did also want to make sure to get to this screen, which are all the resources that I used. All right, so thank you.
Thank you, Emily. That was great. So we were also rejoined by Miriam. So you missed me introducing this, Miriam, but we will circle around in the questions at the end and hopefully have time also to revisit all of our presentations and ask questions then. So we'll now have our next speaker, who Peggy will introduce.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was a lot to unpack right there and very practical. So thank you. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat so that when we start the question and answer session, we can get to them really quickly. And now I'm going to introduce our third speaker, and his name is Gabriel Duke. Hopefully I didn't murder your name. If I did, you can correct me. And he is the learning librarian at the University of Michigan Library. He's going to share with us a study that he did that involved international students. And it was a study about improving the library website information. Welcome, Gabriel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Peggy and everyone. Great presentations. I'm very honored to be here in your company, and I'm going to share my screen right now. I'm hoping you can hear me okay. Excellent. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the library fellowship at the University of Michigan. But the main idea is leveraging the international students as wonderful resources and experts in their lived experiences. All right, so my name is Gabriel Duque from the University of Michigan. I do a lot of library instruction, I do reference, I do many things, but I work a lot with international students. And in this particular case, I participated in one of several library internships that we have. This one is called the Engagement Fellows Program. And some of them share kind of these characteristics. They're paid hybrid student internships, hybrid meaning some of the work is remote, some in person, so during fall and winter semesters. So the idea here is to provide these experiences for students where they're strengthening their leadership, collaborative skills, working very closely with a library mentor. So the way this works, the coordinator of the Engagement Fellows Program put out a call for different projects. I proposed a project and was accepted, and I participated in choosing and interviewing these two students. And like I mentioned, mentorship is a very strong component of this program. And when we can, we also offer a lot of support, but also like library tours. We invite the students to events, even conferences if we can. All right, so next slide here. So the project that I proposed was basically to have the students create a research plan so that I could and they could help me update the library guide for international students at the University of Michigan. At UM, a little bit over 17% of the students are international, and I have a link there to our International Center statistical report. And the two students that were interviewed and chosen for this project were Cecilia Ledesma from Peru, actually from Peru and other countries. It's very interesting. She's lived in different countries and her identity is kind of Peru, Panama, etc. So, and Chan Dai from China. So Cecilia is an undergraduate student, Chan is a grad student, and they designed and implemented a research plan. So the way we organize, and there's a photo of them promoting a survey they created. So the way we organized this experience for them was in the first phase, they spent some time reading articles, kind of understanding the academic library. Then second phase was meeting with different library experts and other people, gathering information. Finally, as a third phase, they really spent some time learning how to create a survey, how to draft a survey. They got a lot of feedback from different colleagues, and they finally created the survey using Qualtrics. And also part of the survey, we asked respondents if they were willing to be interviewed. So that was very interesting. And the final phase, we're in the middle of it, is actually updating and promoting the library guide. So survey implementation, like I mentioned, students created a survey draft, they got feedback, they created a survey. We went through the whole IRB process. I think that was very interesting to them to understand these kind of ethical aspects. And the actual survey was administered from March 16 to 31st. And like I mentioned, some students chose to be interviewed, and we gave them these students prepared wonderful goodie bags that they called, with library swag and other small gifts to encourage participation. This is just a quick snapshot of who responded to the survey. So 87 responses. Not everyone answered every question, of course, and then about half of responses were from grad students. More visiting scholars answered the survey than we expected. So that was very interesting. So takeaways from the survey and the subsequent interviews. Respondents visit the library often. They feel welcome in our spaces. Study spaces and meeting spaces came up a lot. Students asked specifically about spaces where they can Zoom or they can meet privately. That's becoming a real need for any student, but also specifically for international students. And we are meeting that need, but I think we need to do more. And lots of questions related to books, how to check them out, request them, etc. Requests for information, library materials in other languages, interest in video streaming. We have wonderful subscriptions to different video streaming platforms that not many students know about. And there were some services that we thought some students, in some instances, they knew about, but we feel they're underutilized based on how useful they are. Ask a librarian, for example, or subject specialists, connecting with a subject specialist, consultations, etc. And other services like special collections, we feel, for example, Ask a Librarian, they expressed, many of them, knowing about the service, but then when we ask them, do you use it? Very low usage. So we feel we have to promote more of those services. But the conclusions is that international students have the lived experience, the research and language skills many times, the connections with their peers. They're a wonderful resource that we can partner with them to do something like this. And I know not every institution will have, the possibility to create these internships, but even if it's just one-on-one working with a couple of international students, they're just wonderful to work with. Mentoring is a big piece of our internships. And yes, we want them to do work for us. That's great. But equally or more important, I would say, is that it's to provide like a meaningful learning experience for them, that they feel supported, that they feel, of course, you're the mentor, you're the library expert and so on, but that they feel they're a partner. And you see them, the growth they experience and just the learning that happens is just amazing. And yeah, like I mentioned, we're in the middle of updating our library guide at the moment. And at the end of the month, we should be done with our project. And I have a couple of links here that I mentioned, a link to the program, a link to a statistical report. I'm going to share my email with you all, and thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabriel, for that wonderful presentation. That was really interesting. So you bring us to the question and answer period. We have, a good 7 minutes for questions here. Feel free to put them in the chat. I can also lead off with some questions while you're all thinking and formulating, and we'll be looking for those in the chat. Sorry, I'm just rearranging my documents here. Miriam, I'm so glad you were able to rejoin us, and I'm sorry that we had to miss out on part of your presentation. When we lost you, you were talking about different ways of defining international students. So I was wanting to circle back to that and hear more about how different ways of thinking about international students or defining international students can impact our work.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, everyone. Yeah, I mean, what I think, again, it was based on what the literature, studies have proven that a lot of these studies are based on kind of almost like a monolithic group, that the nuances are not there. So you would see, for example, I was beginning to see that there are some, there's more work now being done, even when you say Chinese students, for example, you kind of disaggregate and try to see who's where. So those are the kinds of nuances I think that is needed for us to be able to, for libraries and librarians to be able to provide more useful services. Because again, like I said, this is more from a literature review, and from the sense that you do not see the disaggregation, you do not see the nuances, and I think I broke off at the point where I was reading about a hypothetical case. If you're a Malaysian student studying in Malaysia, but you are at a branch campus of, let's say, an Australian university. So for the Australian university, you're an international student, but you are in a local context. So these are the kinds of, maybe this is a little stretching it a little bit, but these are the kinds of differentiations that would like to see more of in the literature. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, I think that's a really great point. I mean, I think about that as well in my work, where I'm an international student liaison, but many of the students I work with are not technically international students because they're recent immigrants maybe, or children of immigrants. So I think that's a really great innovative way to, to think about. It's an important point that we need to be thinking about. I see a question in the chat. And I think this is for anyone. Mark Matson asks, are there any innovative ways that you think we can institutionalize these mindsets and practices across our organizations? Are there ways that you feel the library can play a role in promoting asset-focused mindset for working with international students at the institution broadly? Anyone want to take an initial stab?
I can try to take an initial stab. So I think a lot of this comes down to, do we recognize that we are biased as just human beings? And are we able to and open to trainings about bias and stereotyping and microaggressions? And are we able to metacognitively and reflect on how we think about working with international students in comparison to working with domestic students, for example? So I think those types of trainings are a really good introductory level start for places that have the funding to do something like that. I know that some of those trainings are also not going to be welcome in all institutions or all states even. Some states are not allowing those types of trainings if they're publicly funded. So I think being open to doing that kind of work on the individual level, and then also at the institutional level, having the support for those kinds of trainings is a really great start, because there are so many stereotypes with international students. And just like Miriam was also saying, how we put all Chinese students in one category. For example, when we think about them just as this one big conglomeration of one type of profile of a student, and that's not the case. So that would be one idea for where to start.
Thanks, Emily. Gabriel or Miriam, did you have thoughts to add?
Yeah, just quickly, that there has to be like a champion in the library for this topic, and that reminds other colleagues, hey, that, you know, international students are here, remember this. And because yeah, deficit thinking is very prevalent in different departments, and I still encounter people who said, you know, the issue with plagiarism is very complex and very very nuanced, and there are reasons. There are reasons why an international student might have more issues with plagiarism as we understand it. So things like that. But having a champion in the library, I think, is very, very important. Reminding people. Yeah.
Yeah. And if I can just share this slide that I wasn't able to get to, and this was something that, again, I think it comes from organizational learning, but I found it really very good in terms of how we kind of make these assumptions. And it's called the ladder of inference. I mean, I'm sure we all probably are aware of it, but I have found it very useful, not even just in dealing with people. You try to, you know, we have the reflexes. So we know that that's there. But then we have to consciously tell ourselves that, you know, what we are seeing and the assumptions we are making and the actions that are derived from those, we can always do a self-check. But, you know, going back to that 2003 article, and it was interesting that that's 20 years ago and we're still talking about the same deficits. And but for me, I went into that conference thinking that I felt like an activist almost, because I was, you know, it was like, okay, people, let's do this. Let's have a rethink here and have an honest conversation, because there were times really I would almost feel some kind of outrage, like, come on, we have to tease out, we have to be more nuanced. And yeah, but I'm pleased that, well, it's still a conversation ongoing, but a little saddened that we are still talking about the same things. Yeah, so that's my addition to that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I actually wasn't familiar with the ladder of inference, so I'm really glad to know about it now. And I'm so glad you were able to bring that perspective, having, you know, a history in this area. And Miriam, I just wanted to mention the other presenters were able to share their emails in the chat. If you would also be willing to share that, that would be great. So if anyone has further questions, they can follow up with the presenters individually.
Sure. And I can just also share the references, and I'm in here from the screen, but I'll go into the chat now and share my my email address. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you. So in our last 2 minutes, I'm going to hand it over to our soon-to-be convener, no longer incoming convener, Peggy, just to have some concluding remarks.
Thank you so much, Katie. Thank you for moderating this. Thank you for organizing all the roundtable discussions in the last year. And I just wanted to mention that for the fall semester, we are hoping to have 2 more roundtable discussions where we'll have at least breakout sessions. That way we can encourage more participation. I think this was such an enlightening and important topic. I personally feel like we should discuss it a little bit more, and hopefully we'll have some time to follow up on it in our next roundtable discussions. I can't think of anything else that we are supposed to announce, Katie. Paula, do you have anything that you want to say?
No, I don't really have anything to add. Thank you.
Great. Well, have a great summer, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.